we're going to get started. We have another panelist. We're going to pretend Diksha is here, and when she actually materializes, she'll sort of appear in I should probably start with just a little caveat, and I don't know if that's a commentary on our topic about the new news itself. And this is entirely not by design, but I happen to have written for 3 of the 4 panelists on this panel. So Ashok, if you ever feel left out, please rap me on the knuckles. And I think it's only fair for that reason that I actually start with you. You know, this topic that we are discussing today about the new news, I wanted to ask you, is it the medium in which the news is being transmitted that's new, or has digital changed the nature of what we perceive as news? Has it shifted that at all?
Well, it's a bit of both. I think a lot of people now consume their basic news, as in the first information, as it were, from digital platforms. It could be a website, it could be social media. Till 7 or 10 years ago, you had television giving you breaking news. Now television doesn't. You get your news, if you're an avid news consumer, you get it off your smartphone or your iPad or your laptop if you're a dinosaur like me. But in terms of actually telling stories and actually writing out that narrative or doing reportage or frankly not doing reportage, I think the so-called new media or new platforms such as the ones you've written on mimic traditional formats far more than they differ from them. They mimic the strengths of traditional media. They also mimic the weaknesses of traditional media. So, for instance, I think across the spectrum, spending on editorial as a percentage of total cost has declined. Maybe it's higher in new platforms which come with a certain degree of funding and lots of enthusiasm initially, but after some time it starts to dry up. Second, especially in terms of coverage of government and politics, I'm not talking about one government or one party, I'm talking about across the spectrum. In terms of understanding how policy is shaped, very few new media companies, and frankly, distressingly, even old media companies, have either not set up rigorous beat systems or are dismantling rigorous beat systems because these are difficult to sustain. You see this across the spectrum. The challenge is more common than different. I know some new media companies are trying to now set up beat systems, and I hope it works. But again, coverage of how policy is shaped, which is what I focus on really, and how decisions in government are made, are often reported without the hard work of actually meeting people in government. Again, I don't mean meeting one politician or the other. It's often not the politician who matters. It's the joint secretary in some musty office who matters, and you have to stand 3 hours outside his office before the fellow deigns to meet you. There is no alternative to that in our country, unfortunately. And not too many people seem to be doing that because, and this is not just a criticism of new media, this is also old media. Because of a variety of reasons, there's pressure to deliver at 6 o'clock in the evening. So if I waste 3 hours, I may not come home back with a story. There is less and less spending on editorial. Editors don't give you enough time don't give you hours and hours or days and days to follow up a story. And sometimes it's just easier to turn to an alternative source, and so on.
Of course, I mean, I think we've all who worked in digital media faced this issue that actually the deadline is always now. The story needs to go up in 2 hours and things. And I'm going to turn to you, Jaggi, as somebody starting first post. It sort of qualifies you to talk about the old days of new media in a nostalgic way almost before. And I remember when I started with First Post, people didn't know what to make of us. And I was based in Calcutta, where we were covering the elections in Bengal that brought Mamata to power. And nobody knew what the hell First Post was or what a digital media was. In the end, I used to pretend to be, people would assume I worked for something called Bengal Post, which was a newspaper, which eventually collapsed because it was built on Sharada money. But as long as they would let me into the door, I would be like, हाँ ठीक है, Bengal Post, whatever. I come. So did you find it hard initially to, especially coming from the print background, to have new media taken seriously?
Yeah, actually, I have no regrets about leaving the old media because I think news has changed fundamentally, and it's been changing fundamentally for the last 10, 15 years. See, the old type of news was from top to bottom. You had the print or television who decided what was news, and it was spread. Now news is happening, actually flowing in multiple directions. It is not just flowing from the journalist to the consumer of news, but the consumer is generating, there are peer-to-peer news platforms, there are so many things that are happening. So the news flows have changed fundamentally. So what I'm saying is, what is the new news is really that the news can flow from anywhere. It can hit you from anywhere through any medium. It could be mainstream media, or in fact, I would call that old media actually, or new media, or whatever it is. So the second thing that has happened, why news is looking new, is because of the nature of change that has happened. Earlier, the journalist was the middleman, the intermediate between the generator of news and the consumer of news. Today, there is no such distinction. The news media has been disintermediated. You can have anybody. I mean, today, just take a completely out of the world example. Let's say Hindustan Lever or Unilever decides that they want to have news. They can. They spend 1,000 crores in ads. So putting 5-10 crores to generate a news media, which is friendly to them, is nothing. So what I'm saying is, you can theoretically create a new. It may be limited in terms of what it will cover, but it can generate news. I mean, so fundamentally, two things that have changed is, one is news is flowing in all directions. Secondly, the news has been disintermediated. The journalist role has reduced.
So in that end, I'm going to turn to you and say, given what Jaggi is saying, would you, as an editor, be differentiating between news and content, which everybody keeps talking about right now? Since it's coming from, as Jaggi is saying, from all different directions right now.
Yeah, a few things. Okay, so can I just touch upon the point that Ashok made before coming to this one? So I think, traditional media, like print and television principally, they have a business model that is on the wane. Digital media has no business model, or rather, like, it's yet to be, a feasible business model is yet to be invented. Often it can feel like we're on the verge of this becoming viable. But it's always like, it's always a bit of a chase. Just as you're catching up, it proves.
Verge makes it sound like media on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
I mean, sometimes people working in digital media can often be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But yeah, so there is really no comparison between a mainstream newspaper or like most big mainstream news brands that all of us know of and consume, compared with like a relatively smaller 15 to 20 person news setup. You really cannot devote a reporter to go sit in front of the textile ministry joint secretary forever. Right. So that's simply not the model. And I think I think digital media will get there. Like in other countries, we've seen that it gets there to 100, 200 person newsrooms, 300 person newsrooms. Fundamentally, I think we should realize that all of this is about the business. Currently, maybe about 12% of digital spends are, 12% of India's ad spends are on digital. Globally, it can be about, in more evolved markets, it can be about 40%. And when that shift happens, all of this will follow. So there is nothing inherently, said about, it's a question of evolution. There are various predictions that you can read on the internet which will say that by 2020, much more of the, digital will be almost as big as print. But then again, the issue is that on digital, like news doesn't have a monopoly over the ad spend. So when you say you spend in print, it's mostly going to newspapers and magazines. When you say you spend on digital, it's actually mostly going to Google and Facebook. All the media outlets on digital put together are, 90% of the ad spends on digital actually go to just Google and Facebook. So all the rest of, if anybody has to be viable, all the rest of us have to, compete for or make do with the rest of it. Having said that, I think in the last few years, online media, I mean, or news on digital, has added a layer of excitement, has added a layer of diversity to our news ecosystem. You see much greater variety of content. A traditional news consumer might not find things that are of use, but then there are a whole lot of readers and users of our sites who do not find much that is of use in a mainstream newspaper. Sometimes news coverage can feel like a conversation with a middle-aged uncle because most of the editors are middle-aged men, so there is a lack of diversity. There is much greater diversity that has now come in. There are issues relating to business and funding, but I think we are on the verge of very exciting times. Just today, actually, Mukesh Ambani is probably going to announce that he is going to sell a feature phone with 4G internet access for 500 rupees. So currently we have 220 million people accessing data on any kind of internet. We're going to add 400 million more. So I think when you have that kind of scale, I think a lot more excitement will happen, a lot more viable businesses will get built, and so on and so forth.
Well, Diksha, welcome to the panel. In terms of the excitement that SK is talking about, yes, it's exciting. There's a lot more variety. There's a lot out there. But as somebody produced in charge of news in this milieu, is it a challenge to be in a milieu where, as we were talking about in the old days, you knew if you were watching television, you knew what you were going to get if you were turned on for BBC, and you knew what you were watching Sony television for. They were all on your same set, but in your head, they occupied certain different spaces. Now we are in a space where Huffington Post and Quartz and Times of India, Indian Express, Scoop, Whoop, BuzzFeed are all swimming in kind of the same soup, as it were. They're all sort of producing news, and they're all making news. The stories they're producing are all, being shared widely and stuff. So does that make it much more challenging in terms, or is it, as he's saying, this is an exciting demographic, an exciting shift?
So I would say that a HuffPost is very different from a Quartz. We focus on technology, we write about business, HuffPost writes about popular culture, about business, and we'll be very different from a news laundry. So I think we all occupy different spaces. It's just that we are so new that right now we look like this one homogeneous entity that is floating around somewhere. But I also want to say that it seems that we have seen a very dramatic change in media as we have moved from print or television to, say, our desktops or mobile phones. But a bigger change is coming. And I think it's going to hit all of us, all our newsrooms, even harder. So in India, we have still not transitioned to the mobile. Like some modern newsrooms are probably thinking of the desktop. But we are still adapting news from, say, the newspaper or television. Like we are producing news for those formats, and then we are adapting from there. We are not mobile first yet. Whereas internationally, we are actually talking about producing content for people who are living and breathing on their mobile phones. Like SK said, the next generation, the next billion, it's coming online on their smartphones. And we have to produce news for that. And that is where the innovation lies. We have to use, I work for an organization that has a bot studio. We are producing bots. We are using AI and related technologies to, to bring news. And I think that is where we have to, that is also what is really key. Like, so far we have talked about the reporting challenges, but we also have to talk about technology right now.
Yeah, no, that is actually, I think, really vital, and I want to get your thoughts on it. A while back, there was an article which actually a colleague of ours, Lakshmi, wrote in the Columbia Journal Review, and there about the new media. And I remembered something that Dhanya Rajendran, who is coming to this conference as well, said. She said, even as a relatively younger person, not the middle-aged man editor, she always felt that it was still print people who were in charge of doing digital, and so they were doing it, but that is different from being a sort of digital native, as you were saying, like people who live and breathe their phones for now. and understanding what that means for news. You know, you're not translating in some way. It is your native medium. You're not. So I wanted to, well, maybe I'll start with you and ask you, how is it different being an editor for a digital news site as opposed to a traditional one?
Well, the most important thing is that you're actually less powerful as an editor because data determines a lot. Like you have access to very, very granular data that tells you everything about like every minor preference of your reader. Of course, you have to then step back and say, okay, like, I mean, you don't have to be a slave to the data, but it's an order of magnitude different kind of revealed preferences about your reader that you know, compared with, let's say, a newspaper editor who doesn't have access to. So, you know, a traditional editor mostly thinks of it from their, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, you know, we all have internal filters of what we think are important. And, you know, when you're in traditional media, you tend to exercise that, either as an individual editor, I mean, more practically and more usually a committee of editors at large publications, right? Online, I mean, the reader really gets to, I mean, you know, for all of our newsrooms, like we are in touch with our interaction with the reader is much more, it's very real. Like, you know, people are yelling at us on Twitter all the time. We get, you know, I mean, just a scroll through.
No respect.
Editor ka to koi izzat hi nahi hai abhi. So yeah, so you get a real sense of what matters. I mean, and it also gives you an opportunity because you don't have a fixed front page, because you don't have a notion of, you know, what a front page should look like or what even an article should be. We have an opportunity to cater to like every minor community, like anything that matters to a small community of people somewhere, which might not make it to the front page of a large newspaper. We have an opportunity to put that out, you know.
Both, all three of them have alluded to the fact that the nature of news has changed. The news cycle no longer exists. I'll give you some stories from my days in print. When I came to Delhi in '94,
News treadmill has replaced the news cycle.
When I came to Delhi in '94, there was a particular reporter in the Hindustan Times bureau where I started working who used to come in to work on Sunday without fail. Because he figured on Sunday, everyone in Delhi was sleeping. There was no journalist in town. There was no one giving news. So he would save up a story from Thursday or Friday, give it in on Sunday, so he'd get page one on Monday morning. So there was a definite news cycle. You file by 5 o'clock in the evening or till Friday. Saturday, Sunday you don't file. Or maybe Saturday you file for the Sunday paper, Sunday you don't file. Today, the news cycle is 24/7. That's one thing. The second thing is, this has started happening with television, but it's happened rapid fire with digital. The hierarchy of news has gone. News is a service you deliver to your consumer. It's not a sermon you give your reader. Again, I'll give you two examples. June 25th, 1983, India wins the World Cup, the Prudential World Cup, okay, big event. In the Telegraph newsroom in Calcutta, M.J. Akbar has a fight. Because M.J. Akbar says, and I don't know whether he wants to be quoted on this now, he says, Chandrasekhar has just finished his Padyatra. That is bigger news. The editors scream at him, the editor screams at him and says, are you crazy? This, obviously, the World Cup gets priority. I'll give you a second example. In 1994, Hindustan Times evening news meeting, Ganesh has been drinking milk throughout the country.
Yes.
Is that news or is that a page 7 box item? There was a genuine debate. And Chandan Mitra was then my editor, and he said, he insisted, and it was a big argument. This is irrational. What are you promoting? He said, look, forget all that. What is news? News at the end of the day is a sociological phenomenon that interests and implicates your readers or your consumers. This does. My reader is interested in this. I can't ignore it. And it's either there as a lead story or it's not there. It can't be seventh lead. And those sort of arguments used to happen back then. Today,
where would
it
you
would be
that argument, Ashok?
I'd put it on page 1, absolutely. It is news. I may find it irrational, but it's news. And those sort of arguments will not happen today because the hierarchy of news has gone. You realize that people are interested in it, you have to give it to them.
Yeah, I was just similar. Like, I think, for instance, I work for a business organization, and 10 years ago, there were so many issues that business newspapers will just not talk about. They're not going to talk about gender at work. A few weeks ago, last week, I think, we had this issue about whether women should get a leave on the first day of their periods. And that actually took over Twitter and Facebook, and a lot of digital media organizations wrote about it, and those stories became very popular. But can you imagine an ET or a BS talking about it 10 years ago? And,
and now this will happen. The digital ones might write about it, and then you will see the editorial come up.
Yeah, you will see. And
so, but is there a danger there? That we are, as we were saying, if you're too much of a slave to data, if you're constantly watching your traffic numbers, if you're constantly looking at your comment board to see and being driven by that and trying to cater to, the people who are reading you, and is there a danger of being too much enthralled by that?
Yes, there is, but I think over the last few years, news organizations have become wiser. You would notice that in most, most of us would realize that cat videos do really well, or, Ranbir Kapoor, doing anything does really well. But you know that in order to build a loyal readership, you cannot rely on that. Maybe in 2014, there was this period when everybody was relying on clickbait headlines and certain types of stories, but that's over now. There's a fatigue that has set in, and you have to, that you have to sort of get into a long-term relationship with your reader. So quality actually matters, and every digital newsroom is thinking about that now.
This dilemma is not new. It goes back to, there was a famous quote by, I think, Lord North, who was a 19th century British member of the House of Lords and a media baron, a press baron. And he famously gave a speech where he said the essential dilemma before the press is, do you give the readers what they want to read or what they should read? So this is a debate going back.
In the end, it's all about, what your mother said, have a balanced diet. It's not like you're not allowed to eat ice cream or chips, but you must have your dal sabzi as well. But
the dal sabzi can be made a little more tasty now.
Tadka. The tadka can be used to spice up your dal a little bit. But speaking of these challenges, when you were dealing with First Post and sort of setting those grounds, did you struggle in the sense of trying to, how did you evolve in understanding what does it truly mean to be heading a digital newsroom right now, as opposed to, is it just like, oh, I can write 6 editorials today and have them all go up in the space of one day, or what does it really mean to be digital?
The problem with digital, the way it's evolving now, is that all of them have become separate echo chambers. Hopefully we didn't do that in First Post, and I thought the primary challenge in First Post was to make it as wide a platform as possible. The editors with different views on the same subject could actually think. What we actually ended in First Post was the tyranny of the editor, the monocultural view that this is the house view on this subject. You could have different things. I think that is important, but today we don't find that model really taking on. We find separate echo chambers of right, left.
Why do you think that happened?
I don't know. I think it's primarily because when you have different views, and you can't have a tyranny of an editor saying my view is what good. When you have brilliant people with different argumentation methods and beliefs, why should you restrict the view to one kind of view? It doesn't make sense. Huh? So obviously, if you write something, somebody may abuse you. If I write something, somebody else may abuse me. But you have to be a platform that encourages multiple views. I think that if digital platforms can become that rather than echo chambers, then I think that'll be the other way to do is to create a neutral technology platform, like say what a Facebook might do, where multiple kinds of ecos actually can rest together and become a truly diverse platform. Maybe that's the challenge that might get met differently of having separate echo chambers. But I think we need to move in that direction.
Yeah, and as a point to that, I should note that one of the things that was very intriguing for many people used to traditional news, a simple example is, in First Post, we used to have multiple people review the same film. And that caused endless confusion with readers who would say, yeah, but this reviewer saying this film is utter trash and this one is praising it to the skies. And that was the point, was we were trying to make is, a reviewer is just a person who has an opinion on a film. It doesn't mean that the person sitting next to that person in the newsroom has the same opinion. And if you can argue your opinion and make a case for it, go for it. And as a reader, you get to choose, ultimately. But SK, I wanted to come to the scenario right now and compare it to, say, the evolution of new media in the West. Especially since, because of HuffPost, when Huffington Post came about in the US, or BuzzFeed for that matter, they walked into kind of an empty playing field, as it were. It was a time when nobody was paying attention to digital. The mainstream was not paying that much attention. So it made an enormous splash, garnered a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention and traffic. When a HuffPost comes here right now, it's a far more crowded marketplace. So what is the challenge for that? You know, you don't have that luxury of that space.
Yeah, I think in the US, certainly there was an opportunity for many sites to rush into a space where, which was not yet occupied by traditional media brands. They were not serving news or content online that seriously. We're talking about 2005, which seems like an eternity away now. But now that has completely changed, and in fact, even in the US. So, I mean, one is that in other countries that opportunity does not exist. In India, it certainly doesn't exist, because all the biggest digital media players in India are all actually the big mainstream media brands. Be it Times of India, NDTV, Indian Express, and the Sun Times, all of them. Like, I mean,
all the 4 top ones are all digital versions of either print or television.
That's right. I mean, if you take the largest pure play digital property, which I think would be Firstpost, it would be nowhere close to the big guns of... but even in the US, the scenario is changing because the traditional media is fighting back. I mean, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of them are now becoming very, very strong. So I think actually the opportunity might be, you know, because your advantage used to be your expertise in SEO. Your advantage used to be your understanding of social. You connected with younger readers in a way that, you know, mainstream newsrooms had no hope of connecting. And, you know, that's not an unchangeable thing. I mean, all that it takes is for the New York Times to hire a young, savvy person to run their Snapchat, right? And they're doing that. I mean, all of them are doing that and doing it rather well. So yeah, so I don't think there is the gap doesn't exist in most parts of the world. Because where it does, it's sometimes served by a large number of small boutique websites. You know, you will see markets with like a really large number of people serving news. Like, I mean, you know, in Southeast Asia and so on, like, there are very interesting experiments. There are sites that just like hire a bunch of young kids straight out of university, give them an iPhone and say, just go cover news. And they have a whole lot of videos and, you know, stuff like that. So, I mean, even as we speak, like the landscape is always changing. And but as long as mainstream media organizations with clout, with legacy, with financial muscle, as long as they take digital seriously, and now of course it's not even optional, like you have to take digital seriously.
So taking digital seriously, would you say for new media here, which soon we are going to have to stop calling new media because it's not going to be so new anymore, will be the middle-aged media. Yeah. But would you say new media here is now in its sort of toddler years, or is it more like getting towards its teenage in its development, or is it still baby steps?
Well, I think an infant. I mean, it has not even started taking baby steps. I think the state of digital media. I mean, you know, if you compare it to the evolution of a human, I would like to believe that it's at its absolute infancy. I think we certainly will see.
So not toilet trained yet.
Not at all.
So that's what we know that from the
and you can tell already. Sometimes, right? So, yeah. So I certainly think that we're going to see a lot of excitement, a lot of investments coming in, newsrooms with, you know, large number of journalists, both doing commentary and reporting. All of it underpinned by hopefully a robust...
I want to get back to the commentary and reporting bit, but Diksha, I wanted to ask you, so given what he's saying about the state of media right now, you know, even Quartz coming into this market, do you think that these guys were talking about, these more boutique sites that come up and had space in the US, right now in the current media landscape in India, if a scroll, for example, was to start up right now, would it have a really difficult time getting market share?
Yes. Because Facebook has made it much harder for us to reach our readers now. We're still figuring out newer platforms, yeah, I think it's much harder now, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it with so many new players that came up in the last, say, 18 months. They're struggling. So I think 2014 was the goal. Yeah, that was like, yeah, that was a good time to enter.
Special just ended.
Exactly.
But I want to get to the what you brought up briefly in terms of print and reporting. And Ashok, I was going to ask you, you wrote this really interesting piece, I think maybe it was in Asian Age or something, about why we have so much screaming matches on television. And the part of it was simple economics, that it takes a lot more money and investment to produce documentaries or features. And so, but it's much cheaper to have 4, 6 people shouting and screaming at each other, and then they leave. Do you see sometimes that in news, in this new media, because it also can face the same danger, because it is much easier to have 10 people write 10 angry commentaries on pro or against an issue than do one in-depth, more investigative thing. So is that kind of a lost opportunity as well?
See, I think, let's be fair, everyone's trying to find that right balance. And these are early days yet. Any media platform, print, television, digital, whatever, at the end of the day has to find that balance between being popular and being influential. Having lots of readers and being taken seriously. Because frankly, if you have 10 different movie reviews saying 10 different things about the same film, it sounds nice, but after the second time, people will lose that interest in that novelty factor. And talking specifically of politics and policy, I think media, not just new media, this is most true of television, is a part of the political noise in the country today, but not a part of serious policy debates. Now, policy debates interest very few people, I understand that. But it is an essential part of the media's job. It's there. And it's a box you have to tick if you are a bona fide media platform. That balance is still being found. There is also the fact that our media and our new media tend to be concentrated, and it's like many of our other institutions, in big cities such as Delhi. So there is this, what Rajdeep once called the tyranny of distance, that exists. And this is, again, not true just to new media, it's true of old media also. New media hasn't quite fixed it. It's tried, some have tried, but it hasn't quite fixed it.
But has it also not accentuated it in a certain way? Because if you're driven by data, and if you see all the time that, oh, most of my readers who are coming from Delhi, Bangalore, you will focus on that as opposed to Guwahati.
I suppose you will. I suppose you need to tailor your data to find the right mix and the right balance. But you know, the indulgence of finding that right balance and of saying, I will do this even if the data tells me otherwise, and I will do this because of the data, is something you can only get if you have the assurance of money backing you over a sustained period of time. If you have a limited budget for 1 year, whether you're new media or old media, you will be under pressure. And as KK put it very aptly, the business model of old media is floundering. We know it's dying. The business model of new media is evolving. We don't know where it will land.
There's a session about that later today.
Yeah, that's later today. So, and if you ask me, the #1 media or news platform in India today is WhatsApp. I really think it's #1 news platform in India today. And WhatsApp makes nobody any money, except Facebook.
And WhatsApp has also shown us the power of fake news. It is like, you know, far more influential than an editorial that somebody would write. And so in that sense, that is also the challenge for this new news that we are talking about. You're not just dealing with so many other news platforms, you're also dealing with fake news that is coming from WhatsApp. But I wanted to shift this, you know,
just to touch upon what, I just want to say that, you know, your readers might be concentrated in Bangalore or Delhi or Bombay. It doesn't mean that they don't want to read about Guwahati. Like, so your readers don't have to come.
That's a presumption you are making, in a sense.
I mean, we know it, right? Like, in fact, if anything, there is a fatigue of among readers of news from Delhi and Bombay. I mean, if I can have reporters in like smaller centers across the country, like also there is, I mean, much more colorful stories. Like the fact is that to meet a joint secretary in the textile ministry, you have to spend a lot of time. anybody, like the super influential state chief secretaries will happily meet you and like spend a lot of time with you. And you can actually get like more interesting, colorful stories.
State news has died.
Yes.
And that's not because readers don't want it. When I was growing up, I grew up in the 80s reading India Today. And I was a boy in Calcutta reading about Gujarat politics because India Today was telling me Gujarat politics. And the big papers had solid state reportage, which is now dead.
I think Indian Express is maybe a happy exception.
And one can't blame, well, in Hindustan, in Hindu also to some degree. But this is not something new media has done. This is old media has done it.
And not just state news, even in Calcutta, where I'm from, the Telegraph, the main newspaper, has just pretty much dismantled its city news. Which was a separate supplement. Now it's like one page that's snuck into the paper. So,
well, business idea for anybody looking to invest in digital media, start a state news-based network.
But I think with organizations like Scroll has started Satyagraha, News Minute has a lot of, they write in several languages, and I think there is Lullen Top. I think if we look at their data, it would be outside Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay. So there is, if you go beyond English, then there is clearly audience outside these cities, and then you can invest in reporting there.
So for new media right now, where are we with the situation right now is what I wanted to ask everybody on the panel. So, initially it was just about making your mark and kind of planting your flag in the sand or mountaintop or whatever metaphor you want to use. So you make your presence, you want to build up traffic and all of that. But at some point, all these media, especially whether it's a first post or whether it's something that is much more conscious about, is it like Swarajya, which is like making no bones about this is we are wearing our political ideology, this is how it's framed. So you could say it's niche in a certain way. You realize also that trying to scale up to the level of a Times of India or something is a huge jump. So you're going to have to figure out, am I chasing a niche? Do I want to make the mass my goal, or am I content in like being really the #1 in my particular niche, and is that going to be enough?
See, sometimes what we define as niche is not really niche, but mainstream, which is not been understood. Like, okay, Fox News started thinking it was catering to a small niche. Then they found that the niche was half the country. And they are the most profitable news channel in the US. Okay, so when it comes to, see, the reason why you have shouting matches like in the TV, like Republic or the Times Now, is because they are following the Fox News model of aggravating a certain issue which has been under-stressed earlier. So that's the thing. So they may not be niche in the sense, I mean, it's a unstated need for that kind of news, which is not being met, which is why they are there. So if you say pontificate and say, okay, this thing is for the rabble, we are not going to stoop to that, we're not going to do that, I think they're meeting a need. They may die because at some point people will tire of it.
And a Breitbart might come and say, we are the news.
That's right. So that might change. The most important struggle that we really need to do is that I think we need to create platforms which have less echo chambers. And I think that is the challenge for media. Even if it's, say, speaking of Swarajya, we know where our ideology comes from, but we want to be a little more broad-based because we don't want to delete or, say, deter people with differing ideas from coming there. So we want to a broad basis. So I think that's a challenge for all media.
Let me ask you at that point, you had a quote which many people are aware of, and it's actually, where you said like left liberal media, it's neither left nor liberal in that sense. But in this country, when since you're talking about echo chambers, do people even understand, is right also right? Because if on Swarajya you write from a principal point against, for example, these cattle slaughter rules. You say like this is against this idea of the echo chamber is so set in place that your comment board, you're viciously attacked as a closet liberal. So how difficult is it going to be to break this echo chamber?
No, I think people have to accept the fact that people will abuse. But that doesn't mean you have to stop saying what you have to say. Of course, if it comes to physical abuse, you may start, shut up. But as long as it's just verbal abuse, I think you can take the heat, and that's fine. And people need to hear what they don't want to hear sometimes, which is, I think, a good thing. I hope if lots of people do that, it's a good thing. And within the echo chamber also, you can change views. by saying that, look, this is a valid view, even though you may not agree with it.
Let me ask you this question. Okay, so, digital media is perceived as being disruptive. It was perceived as being more agile. It could do certain things. We've talked about all of that. But has digital new media in India actually proven to be disruptive in any way? For example, Ashok, could you, with all these sites and all that have started up, could we see a true Politico in India? And everyone's obsessed about politics in this country. Is there space for a real Politico?
That takes me back to another question. Indians are not used to subscription models. And that is true for print. That is true for much more true for television, which is why a rerun of Balaji Telefilm's old soap operas, cost of content zero, actually has you paying a greater subscription fee than a news channel that produces content every hour. And the subscription model doesn't exist, frankly, in digital either. So if you want quality news commentary and reportage, you pay for it. One of the things I used to do when I turned freelance was contribute to the Economist Intelligence Unit, monthly India report. Many in this room may have done it. Okay? What struck me as interesting and almost sad was that I was writing, in a sense, a long report for people interested in India, could be business people, political people across the world, who were subscribing to the EIU. I was an Indian writing about my country to people interested in my country and policy issues here or whatever, so the economy here. And they were not trusting an Indian brand, they were trusting the Economist. It was being monetized by the Economist Intelligence Unit, not by Times of India, India Today, Quartz, whatever it is, Scroll, something in India. And that's because we've never really seriously explored a subscription-based model that looks at fewer readers and fewer subscribers, but provides value so that their fees are justified.
The Columbia Journal article I talked about had the somewhat provocative headline, "Can digital media save Indian journalism?" I'm going to sort of put that question to each of you before we move to the Q&A with the audience. But you can interpret it in any which way you want. But basically, it also boils down to this nimbleness, this disruptiveness that we are talking about. Has it proven to allow new media to carve out a space for independence? Or is this whole idea of independence itself a kind of, fits your definition kind of concept, like one person's independence is, another person's left liberalness or whatever it is?
So I think saving is, it's a bit sanctimonious. I don't know.
Mother Teresa.
Yeah, I don't know what it has to be saved from. I think new media can definitely help us reach more readers in India. We can introduce people who have probably never paid any interest to news, start paying attention to it. We can also, I think it is actually, like, the biggest change in our lives right now is going to be technology, and we can actually use technology to help both journalists and readers.
Yeah, I think the new media and especially digital media has come like a breath of fresh air. Some of it might smell bad, but it is there. But the point about it is this: if you did not have that, you would not have been able to break the monopoly of a few elitist publications who are directly in bed with the powers that be. And today you have, there is a session on media should talk truth to power, but first they should talk the truth. And that needs several people to say that that's not the full truth, there is this also, there is this also. This today, if you raise something, social media, somebody will say, but that's wrong. Here is a fake picture, this is a real one. So you're having real-time correction, you're having so much. So people are talking truth to power, the truth to power in powerful media. And that itself is an important corrective.
Well, speaking of then media and independence, okay, let me jump off what Jaggi is saying and ask you, yes, we break the monopoly of those old players who are in bed with those in power, but does that mean new media is also, just because nobody was allowing it into their bed so they could speak the truth, but is new media also actually hankering to get into those same beds? And, what does that mean for independence, as we were talking about?
The point is that the barrier for entry is really, really low. So if somebody has a hypothesis, like the one I mentioned earlier, that there is a market for straight news and maybe somebody can start it, right? And if there is an audience for it, and if there is a working business model for it, it's inescapable that we live in a society and there are hierarchies and people are attracted to power and so on and so forth. But at least theoretically, it's possible to run that business without being in bed with a politician, right? The problem comes when you're part of a large industrial group where the media is a small part of your business interests, and then to run your power plants or all the important businesses that matter, you have to be in favorable terms with the politician. That is a real problem. Nobody really objects if a media owner is at a party with a politician. That's fine, right? But just to quickly point, talk about the save the journalism question. I'm not a believer that Indian journalism needs much saving. I think I'm a fan of Indian journalism, to be honest. I think digital media has been a force for good. It has introduced a lot of vitality. It has introduced, Rohan is here. Like, the Ken is a great addition to our media ecosystem. Factor Daily is a great addition to our media ecosystem. And I think we will see much more of these. We'll probably see, if there is enough of a demand for a good quality policy publication, we will see one. So people with interest, with a little bit of appetite for risk, can start all these publications, right? So that's a great thing.
I'm going to ask you to hold your thought because I also want to get some questions. So let's open this up to some questions.
Questions? Two questions.
Hi, my question is to Diksha. You raised the point about mobile-first newsrooms. And I think KK was mentioning that there's about 240 million people already accessing internet on their phones in the country. So is it that people are already accessing news on their mobile phones and our newsrooms just aren't catering to them as well as they should be? Or is it that the people are currently accessing news elsewhere and they're moving towards a mobile-first thing and you guys will get there eventually?
Readers are accessing news on their mobile phone. And Indians are going to come online. There are a lot of Indians who don't have internet right now. They will start using the internet on their smartphones. So my point was that a lot of newsrooms in India haven't really adjusted to that. They're still writing for the print and then adapting that for the mobile. But having said that, there are a lot of organizations that are actually using what is there on your mobile to deliver news to you. They're using Facebook Messenger. WhatsApp is, I don't think anyone has really figured out how to use WhatsApp, but they're using Slack. You already get, like for us, we're like a Quartz or a Huffington Post. We're not a newspaper, so it's not as if you are going to come to us. We have to reach our reader, and we have to reach our reader through the mobile phone. So, and that requires, you have to tweak the way you present news, the way you present your content. You have to innovate a little bit, which I thought was kind of missing in our newsrooms at this point.
Mr. Malik alluded to the fact that Indians are not used to the subscription model. I just want to know if the media community is making any concerted effort to let the general masses know that whatever is free, you actually end up paying for it. So, if they need quality news, they obviously have to pay for the subscription to get it. Otherwise, they will get what they get on the television.
Well, I don't know what we can do apart from talking about it or writing about it, but the fact is, free content is now a drug, which is easily available on the internet. And free content, as you correctly suggested, could be dubious, could be correct, we don't know. And free content is a drug that has gone beyond being recalled now. I think the subscription-based model, to implement it in India, and frankly, in almost anywhere, is going to be very, very difficult. Because there's so much free content available online today that I doubt people are going to pay for it. In fact, there's a term that, I can't remember the term now, but that marketing people have now coined for people who wake up in the morning, reach for their smartphone or their iPad or the tablet, and just skim through a variety of websites. and leave the 3 or 4 or 5 newspapers which have been bought at home untouched. And what they are skimming is some good content, some not so good content. I think it's a drug which has gone beyond being recalled. So I'm actually seriously wondering what the future is in that sense, and how discerning customers will be able to tell between what is less effective news or less serious news and what is more serious news.
And on that note of drugs, I'm sorry, we were going to have to end this session, but please join me in thanking our panelists, Estesh Jaggi, Ashmi Chandra.